The glass and steel atrium of Harmony Records gleamed like a cathedral built for ambition, its marble floor reflecting the pendant lights that hung like forgotten stars. It was 11:47 p.m. on a humid August night in New York City, 2025, and Abigail, Cotter Abbey, to the few who dared familiarity, strode across the lobby with the precision of a metronome. Her heels clicked in sharp, solitary rhythm, each step a reminder of the empire she'd built and the solitude it cost her. Her phone glowed in her hand, a cascade of notifications, emails from investors, a Slack thread about AI-driven music algorithms, and a trending TikTok post accusing Harmony of signing a pop star with a questionable past. The digital noise was relentless, a storm she navigated daily as CEO. She didn't notice the man at first. He was crouched beside the grand piano at the heart of the lobby, a relic from the company's early days when it still believed in art over algorithms. The piano's black lacquer shone under the dim light, its curves soft against the atrium's hard edges. The man, broad-shouldered and in his late 30s, moved with quiet reverence, polishing the piano's legs with a cloth as if it were a sacred artifact rather than corporate decor. His navy jumpsuit bore the name Benz in faded embroidery, and a faint hum escaped him, a melody too soft to place. Yet it tugged at something buried in Abby's chest. She stopped, her thumb hovering over her phone. "If you can play Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, I'll marry you on the spot." The words spilled out, half joking, half defiant, a spark of recklessness in an otherwise calculated night. She didn't look up from her screen, but her voice carried across the empty lobby, cutting through the distant whine of a floor buffer. The man Benjamin Sullivan, though she didn't know his name yet, paused, his hand stilling on the cloth. He didn't turn, but his silence was louder than the echo of her heels. Slowly, he stood, one hand resting lightly on the piano bench, his frame unfolding with a grace that didn't match the jumpsuit. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were a strange shade, somewhere between storm gray and forest green, clear yet unreadable, like a lake hiding its depths. "I heard you," he said, his voice low, steady, with a trace of gravel that suggested years of keeping thoughts to himself. "But that's not a piece you play because someone dares you." Abby arched an eyebrow, her phone forgotten in her hand. "So, you do know the piece." It wasn't a question. She studied him, the way his fingers curled around the cloth. With the precision of a soldier folding a flag, the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He didn't answer, just returned to his work, folding the cloth methodically, as if her challenge was a breeze he'd already let pass. She gave a soft scoff, more to herself than to him. "Didn't think so." The words were sharper than she intended, a reflex from a life spent commanding boardrooms. She didn't know why she'd said it. Maybe it was the weight of another late night in a building she ruled but never belonged to. Maybe it was the absurd romance of the piano, gleaming under lights no one noticed, a monument to a passion she'd buried long ago. Or maybe it was the way Ben had looked at the piano, not as a task to be checked off, but as something remembered, something loved. She turned on her heel, the moment over, and strode toward the elevator. Her badge swiped with a soft beep, and the doors closed, swallowing her into the belly of her kingdom. The lobby fell silent again, save for the faint hum of the buffer in the distance. Ben waited until the elevator's hum faded before he moved. He wiped the last fingerprint from the piano's lid, his touch lingering as if the instrument might whisper back. The building was still now, its pulse slowed to a hush. He glanced around once, then slid onto the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys, not pressing, just resting, as if tracing the outline of a memory. He didn't play. He just sat there, eyes closed, listening to a silence shaped like songs he hadn't touched in years. The air around him felt heavy, not with regret, but with the weight of choices made long ago. The next morning, Abby sat in, Her corner office on the 42nd floor, the Manhattan skyline sprawling beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows. Her assistant, Emily Walsh, handed her a coffee and a tablet with the day's agenda. A 9 a.m. call with investors, a new meeting about a new streaming platform deal, and a 3 p.m. briefing on the TikTok controversy that was gaining traction. The hashtag Harmony Hypocrisy is trending, Emily said, her voice cautious. They're saying we're prioritizing profit over ethics. The board wants a statement by tonight. Abby barely nodded, her eyes drifting to the lobby below, visible through the glass walls of her office. The piano stood alone, its lid catching a sliver of sunlight. A faint smudge, barely noticeable, marred its surface. She remembered Ben's hand resting there, the stillness in his gaze. "Emily," she said, cutting off a rundown of the afternoon's logistics. "Who's the overnight janitor?" Emily blinked, caught off guard. Benjamin Sullivan. Started about 6 months ago. Third shift, keeps to himself." "Why?" Abby didn't answer. She just stared at the piano a moment longer, then turned back to her tablet as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted, a crack in the polished veneer of her routine. She didn't know why the man's silence lingered in her mind, or why the piano ignored by everyone else felt like a question she couldn't answer. That evening, Abby stayed late again. The office was a ghost town, the hum of computers and fluorescent lights replaced by an eerie quiet. Deadlines loomed. A gala next week featuring a string quartet she didn't care for. A board meeting where her uncle, Charles Carter, would grill. Her own quarterly profits, and the ever-present pressure to outpace competitors in a world where music was reduced to viral snippets on social media. She shut her laptop, the screen's glow fading, and headed downstairs. The lobby was dim, the pendant lights casting soft halos across the marble. Ben was there, kneeling beside the piano, polishing its brass pedals with the same care as the night before. She cleared her throat, the sound sharp in the stillness. "I owe you an apology." He didn't flinch, didn't stop moving. For what? "For being condescending," she said, crossing her arms. That Chopin comment was reckless. He paused, his cloth hovering above the pedal. "Most people wouldn't remember." "I remember everything," Abby replied, her voice softer now. "That's how I stay ahead." Ben stood, his frame filling the space with quiet authority. "Then you should also remember Chopin isn't a party trick. It's a prayer set to music." She tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. "You speak like someone who's played him." He gave a small, cryptic smile, the kind that held more history than humor. "I've played a lot of things. Doesn't mean I still do. Why not?" she asked, stepping closer, her curiosity outweighing her usual restraint. He looked at her, his eyes steady, unyielding. "Because some things stop belonging to you when you stop needing them to survive." Abby was quiet, the weight of his words settling like dust in the air. That sounds like something a man says when he's lost more than he expected to. Ben's gaze softened, just for a moment, before he nodded once. "Good night, Miss Carter." He turned to leave, his footsteps muffled against the marble. "Wait," she called, her voice catching. He stopped, half turning. She walked to the piano, ran her hand along its edge, the wood cool under her fingers. "Do me a favor. Next time I say something reckless, call me out." "Do you say reckless things often?" he asked, a faint spark in his tone. "Only when I feel something." "I don't understand," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His expression shifted, something raw flickering behind his eyes. "You understand more than you think. You just don't know how to say it." He left her there, standing beside the piano, the lobby silence pressing in. Abby's phone buzzed in her pocket, a notification about the TikTok post, now with 1.2 million views. She ignored it. For the first time in years, The noise of her world felt secondary to the quiet of a moment she couldn't quite name. Upstairs, the security cameras recorded the empty lobby, their lenses missing the faint shift in energy around the piano. Somewhere, in the shadows of Ben's past, a melody waited, and in Abby's heart, a question began to form, one that would unravel everything she thought she knew about power, love, and the music she'd forgotten how to hear. The Harmony Records lobby was a different beast at midnight, its glass walls swallowing the city's glow, the grand piano standing like a forgotten sentinel in a sea of marble. Abigail Carter, still in her tailored blazer from a day of outmaneuvering, boardroom sharks, found herself drawn back to it. The TikTok storm had worsened #Harmony Hypocrisy, now trending with 2.8 million views, fueled by clips of the disgraced pop star's old interviews. Her phone buzzed with Emily Walsh's urgent messages. Asterisk. The board wants a press release by 6 a.m. Charles is pushing for damage control. Asterisk. Abby silenced the notifications. She wasn't here for the noise. She was here for the quiet, for the man who'd looked at the piano like it held his secrets. Benjamin Sullivan was there, as she'd known he would be, kneeling beside the piano's brass pedals, his cloth moving in slow, deliberate arcs. The faint hum of a melody lingered in the air again, something classical, mournful, cut off as soon as he sensed her presence. He didn't look up, but his shoulders tensed slightly, betraying his awareness. Abby cleared her throat, to sound softer this time, less like a CEO issuing a command. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice carrying a vulnerability she hadn't planned. "Last night, that Chopin thing. It was stupid." Ben paused, his cloth hovering mid-motion. "For what?" His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, like a man used to guarding his thoughts. "For being condescending," she admitted, crossing her arms as if to shield herself from the admission. "I don't usually throw out challenges like that. It's not who I am." He stood slowly, folding the cloth with the same precision she'd noticed the night before, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Most people wouldn't remember," he said, his gray-green eyes meeting hers for the first time. "You did." "I remember everything," Abby replied, her voice quieter now, almost confessional. "It's how I stay ahead in this game." Ben's gaze held hers, steady, unyielding, like he was seeing past the polished exterior of Abigail Carter, CEO, to the woman beneath. "Then you should also remember Chopin isn't a party trick. It's a prayer set to music." The words landed, like a stone in still water, rippling through her. She tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. "You speak like someone who's played him." He gave a small, cryptic smile, the kind that carried more weight than warmth. "I've played a lot of things. Doesn't mean I still do. Why not?" She pressed, stepping closer, her curiosity outweighing the caution that usually governed her interactions. The lobby's silence amplified the moment, the distant hum of the city outside a faint underscore to their words. Ben looked at her, his expression unreadable but not closed off. "Because some things stop belonging to you when you stop needing them to survive." Abby felt the weight of those words, heavy with a story she couldn't yet read. That sounds like something a man says when he's lost more than he expected to. For a moment, something flickered in Ben's eyes, grief, perhaps, or recognition. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Good night, Miss Carter." He turned to leave, his footsteps soft against the marble, but Abby's voice stopped him. "Wait." She walked to the piano, her fingers brushing its edge, the wood cool and smooth under her touch. "Do me a favor. Next time I say something reckless, call me out. Do you say reckless things often?" He asked, a faint spark of humor in his tone, the first she'd heard from him. "Only when I feel something I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, raw with a truth she hadn't meant to share. Ben's gaze softened, and for a moment, The lobby felt less like a corporate mausoleum and more like a confessional. "You understand more than you think," he said. "You just don't know how to say it." He left her there, the piano gleaming under the pendant lights, its silence louder than the city outside. Abby stood frozen, her hands still on the instrument, feeling the echo of his words. She didn't know why she kept coming back. Why this man, a janitor, of all people, had stirred something she'd buried long ago. But as she rode the elevator to her office, the question lingered, sharp and insistent. The next evening, Abby found herself at her desk, scrolling through YouTube instead of reviewing the press release Emily had drafted. The TikTok controversy was spiraling, with influencers now dissecting Harmony's entire catalog for ethical lapses. But Abby's focus was elsewhere. She typed Benjamin's piano into the search bar on a whim, half expecting nothing. What she found stopped her cold. A grainy video from 2005. A young man in a Montreal concert hall, his fingers dancing across a Steinway with a precision that bordered on reverence. The caption read, *Benjamin S. Finalist, St. George Classical. Showcase, 2005. Rising star, *. The face was younger, the hair less gray, but the eyes, those same gray-green depths, were unmistakable. The video ended abruptly, and a quick search revealed nothing more. He'd vanished from the circuit by 2009, a ghost in the music world. She closed her laptop, her heart pounding. Who was this man polishing floors in her building? And why had he walked away from a talent that could have filled concert halls? The following night, Abby returned to the lobby, her heels softer against the marble, her posture less guarded. Ben was there, as expected, wiping down the piano's lid with a care that felt personal. She didn't hesitate this time. "You're not just a janitor, are you?" He didn't look up. "And you're not just a CEO." She crossed her arms, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Touché. But I saw you, Ben. Montreal, 2005. You were incredible." He paused, his claw stilling, but his expression remained unreadable. "You've done your homework. I don't like mysteries." "In my building," she said, stepping closer. "You were a finalist, a rising star, and then you disappeared. Why?" Ben set the cloth down, his movements slow, deliberate. "You ever lose something that made sense of your world in one moment?" Abby didn't answer, but her silence was enough. He continued, his voice low, distant. "You train your whole life to master something. You breathe it, sleep it, bleed for it. Then, one day, it stops being enough. Not because you're not good, but because life hands you a new sheet of music and says, 'Play this instead,' and it's written in a key you've never seen." "What was the moment?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost afraid of the answer. He hesitated, his eyes drifting to the piano. "My wife. Cancer. She passed in the spring of 2009. Our daughter, Sophie, was 2. Abby's breath caught, the weight of his words settling like a stone in her chest. "And you chose her," she whispered. Ben nodded, his jaw tight. "I couldn't tour with a toddler. Couldn't teach master classes and still be there when she woke up coughing in the night. I had to choose." Abby was silent, her mind racing. She thought of her own childhood, the nights spent practicing scales under her father's unforgiving gaze, a composer whose brilliance was matched only by his cruelty. "My father was a composer," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Brilliant, but broken. Music was his god and his curse. "One night when I was 12, I missed a note. He said, 'Don't touch that piano again until you're worth hearing.' I never played after that." Ben's eyes met hers, steady, searching. "You still believe him?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But I still hear him." He stepped closer, his presence grounding, like the low notes of a chord. "You ever play for someone who doesn't know who you are?" "No," she said, her throat tight. Then maybe that's what we're both missing. The next night, Abby returned to the lobby well past midnight. The piano gleamed under the low lights, untouched, waiting. She sat, her hands hovering above the keys, hesitant, like a diver afraid of the plunge. Then, softly, cautiously, she began to play. The first notes were halting, clumsy, like a language half forgotten. But she kept going, her fingers remembering more than her mind dared to. Then a second pair of hands joined hers. Not intrusive, not showy, just there, lifting the melody where she faltered, weaving a harmony that felt like forgiveness. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Ben sat beside her, his expression unreadable, his playing steady, as if the past wasn't chasing either of them. They played a patchwork of broken rhythms and half-remembered scales, and somehow, it was beautiful. When they finished, neither spoke for a long moment. Then Ben said, "Your left-hand tenses when you're uncertain." Abby exhaled, a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding. "So does my heart." He looked at her, a faint smile breaking through. The two are usually connected. She turned to face him, the lobby silence wrapping around them like a cocoon. "What was that piece we just played?" "I don't know," he said, his voice soft but certain. "We made it up." Abby smiled, not the practiced boardroom smile, but something raw, real. "Maybe we should finish it someday." Ben nodded, his eyes holding hers. "Maybe we already started." As she rode the elevator to her office, Abby felt something shift inside her, a key turning in a lock she hadn't touched in years. The piano's echo lingered, not just in the lobby but in her bones, a melody that wasn't loss but possibility. And somewhere in Ben's quiet presence, she glimpsed a truth she wasn't ready to name. That music, like love, could find you even when you'd stopped looking for it. The Harmony Records lobby, once a sanctuary of quiet at midnight, now felt like a stage under a spotlight that never dimmed. It was Tuesday, August 12, 2025, and Abigail Carter stood in her 42nd floor office. The Manhattan skyline a cold constellation. Beyond the glass, her phone buzzed incessantly, a digital swarm she couldn't escape. The TikTok hashtag Harmony Hypocrisy had ballooned to 4.3 million views, but it wasn't the pop star scandal fueling the fire anymore. A new video had surfaced, rainy and shaky, captured through the security booth's glass wall. Abby and Benjamin Sullivan at the grand piano, their hands weaving a duet, their eyes meeting in a moment too raw for the world to witness. The caption: "Read, asterisk, CEO and janitor in late-night duet romance or power play?" The comments were a battlefield. She's slumming it for PR. He's using her to climb. Harmony's a mess. By noon, the video had 200,000 views on X alone, the algorithm amplifying whispers into a roar. Abby's assistant, Emily Walsh, stood beside her desk, her tablet clutched like a shield. "It's everywhere," Emily said, her voice tight with the weight of bad news. Slack threads, X Reddit, even a thread on Glassdoor speculating about workplace ethics. The security team's investigating who leaked the footage. "I'm sorry, Abby." Abby stared at the frozen frame on her screen, her fingers on the keys. Ben's steady presence beside her, the piano glowing like a beacon in the dim lobby. The intimacy was undeniable, not because it was romantic, but because it was real, two people finding something true in a world built on facades. She exhaled slowly, her hands unclenching. "How many views now?" "Over 300,000 across platforms," Emily said, hesitating. The comments, they're mixed. Some call it inspiring, but most are spinning narratives. Power dynamics, favoritism, you name it. The board's been calling. Charles left a voicemail demanding a frank conversation this evening. Abby's jaw tightened. Her uncle, Charles Carter, chairman of the board, had always wielded his authority like a gavel, ready to judge her every move. She turned away from the screen, her eyes drifting to the lobby below. The piano stood silent, its smudge-free lid catching the afternoon light. She could almost feel Ben's hands beside hers, the harmony they'd woven in that fleeting moment. "Let them call," she said, her voice steady but laced with defiance. "I'm not apologizing for playing a piano." Emily shifted uncomfortably. "It's not just a piano, Abby. It's him. People are saying you're risking the company's reputation for a janitor." The word landed like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was reductive. Ben wasn't just a janitor, any more than she was just a CEO. But the world loved its labels, its neat boxes for messy truths. Abby didn't respond, just waved Emily out, her mind already racing to the man who'd stirred this storm without trying. 2 hours later, she found Benjamin Sullivan in the staff stairwell, wiping down handrails with the same methodical care. He gave the piano. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, making the space feel like a confession booth for secrets nobody wanted. He didn't look up as she approached, but his rhythm slowed, sensing her presence. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice low calm, but carrying the weight of someone who'd already heard the whispers. Abby held out her phone. The video paused on their duet. "It's everywhere." "I know," he said, still focused on the handrail. "Someone in payroll winked at me this morning and called me Maestro. Thought he was having a stroke." She didn't smile. "This isn't funny, Ben." "No, it's not." He finally looked at her, his gray-green eyes steady but guarded. "But it's not surprising either. You knew someone recorded us?" "Found out this morning. A security guard mentioned it. Said the night crew was passing it around like a trophy." He set the cloth down, leaning against the wall, his jumpsuit creased from hours of work. "What do they think it is?" Abby's throat tightened. "They're turning it into something it's not. Saying you're using me, or I'm manipulating you, or this is some stunt to fix my image after the TikTok mess. They're calling it a scandal." Ben studied her, his expression unreadable. "And what do you think it is?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I think it's real," she said, her voice cracking with a truth she hadn't planned to admit. "Whatever this is that moment, the music, it's the most honest thing I've touched in years." He didn't move, but something softened in his gaze, like a door creaking open. "Then why do you look like you're already running from it?" Her breath caught, his words cutting through her defenses. "Because I know how this ends. They'll drag my name, question my judgment, my leadership, everything I've built. The board's already circling like vultures." Ben's voice was calm but sharp now, like a blade honed by years of quiet endurance. "You think I don't know what that feels like? I gave up the only thing I was ever praised for. I vanished so my daughter could breathe. You think I don't know what it means to watch a life dissolve?" Abby looked away, her arms wrapping around herself like armor. "I didn't ask for this." "No," he said, stepping closer, his presence grounding her despite her resistance. "But you played for it. You showed up for it, and now you want to hide." "I'm trying to protect you," she snapped, her voice echoing in the stairwell. "No," Ben replied, unflinching. "You're trying to protect your image, and you're using me as the reason to retreat." The words landed like a blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Abby's mouth opened, then closed, her usual eloquence failing her. "When was the last time you stayed in something messy?" Ben asked, his voice softer now, but no less piercing. "Something you couldn't script, couldn't schedule, couldn't control." She stepped back, her heels scraping against the concrete. "You have no idea the pressure I'm under." "You're right," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I just know what it feels like to be left standing when someone walks away." The air between them grew dense, like a note held too long, waiting for resolution. "Is that what you think I'll do?" Abby whispered, her voice trembling with a fear she hadn't named. "I don't think it," Ben said, his tone steady but heavy. "I see it." She turned and left the stairwell, the door slamming shut behind her, its echo chasing her back to the elevator. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. Charles wants you in the boardroom at 4 p.m. tomorrow. It's serious. Abby ignored it, her mind replaying Ben's words, each one a mirror she wasn't ready to face. The next morning, the headlines hit like a tidal wave. Billboard: Harmony Records CEO in questionable duet with janitor, ethics concerns raised. Variety: power ballad or power imbalance? The X platform was a war zone, with hashtags like #CEO Vis Janitor and #Harmony Scandal trending alongside memes and think pieces. One post, with 50,000 likes, read, Abby Carter's playing Cinderella with the help, but who's footing the bill? Another, crueler, speculated about Ben's motives. Janitor's got game, leveraging the CEO for a comeback. Inside Harmony's headquarters, whispers followed Abby down every hallway. She felt them like pinpricks, the weight of judgment from employees who once deferred to her every word. The board meeting loomed like a guillotine, and Charles Carter's voicemail played on loop in her mind. We need to address the optics, Abigail. This is bigger than you now. She spent the morning in her office, drafting a statement with Emily that she had no intention of releasing. The words felt hollow, a corporate bandage for a wound too deep to cover. Her eyes kept drifting to the lobby, where the piano stood untouched, a silent witness to the chaos. She thought of Ben, his hands on the keys, his voice calling her out. In the stairwell, he'd seen her fear, her instinct to retreat, and it stung because he was right. That evening, Abby stayed late again. Not for work, but for answers. The lobby was empty, the piano gleaming under the dim lights. The Ben wasn't there, but a folded piece of paper rested on the music stand. No name, just a fragment of handwritten music, 4 bars, half a melody, a beginning. It was in Ben's precise script, the notes delicate but unfinished, like a conversation. Cut short. Abby traced the lines with her fingertip, her heart pounding. This wasn't just music. It was a question, a challenge. A door left ajar. She tucked the paper into her pocket and rode the elevator to her office, the city's lights blurring beyond the glass. The internet was still ablaze. The board was closing in, and somewhere in the quiet of the night, a man who'd lost everything was daring her to find something worth keeping. Abby didn't know if she was ready, but for the first time in years, she wanted to try. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear, a sterile tang that clung to the back of Abigail Carter's throat as she navigated the fluorescent-lit corridors of New York Presbyterian's pediatric wing. It was 1:12 a.m. on August 14th, 2025, and the city outside thrummed with its usual restless pulse, but inside room 312, time seemed to hold its breath. Abby's heels, usually a sharp metronome, were muffled against the linoleum, her tailored coat replaced by a sweater that felt too soft for the weight of the moment. She'd come straight from the Harmony Records office, where the #CEO Vis Janitor hashtag had hit 6 million views, and the board's ultimatum loomed like a storm cloud. But none of that mattered now. Not when Benjamin Sullivan's daughter, Sophie, lay pale and fragile in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes framing her small face like delicate vines. Abby had found Ben's apartment empty earlier that evening, the door ajar, a neighbor muttering about an ambulance and a bad episode. Her chest had tightened, the handwritten music fragment from the piano still tucked in her pocket, burning like a talisman. She'd run, not walked, to the hospital, driven by a pull she couldn't name. Now, standing in the doorway of room 312, she saw Ben, his broad shoulders hunched, one hand gripping Sophie's, the other covering his eyes. His breathing was shallow, shaky, a rhythm of grief held barely in check. Sophie, 7 years old and smaller than she should be, looked like a porcelain doll under the harsh lights, her chest rising faintly with each beep of the heart monitor. A stuffed bear, worn at the edges, was tucked under her arm, its button eyes staring blankly. "Ben," Abby said softly, stepping inside, her voice barely above the hum of machines. He looked up, his gray-green eyes raw, hollowed by exhaustion, and something deeper fear, unmasked. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice rough, like he'd forgotten how to speak. "Your neighbor," she said, moving closer, her eyes on Sophie. "She said you didn't answer my text." He blinked, as if the concept of a phone was a foreign language. "Sorry." The word was a whisper, barely audible over the monitor's steady pulse. Abby approached the bed, her gaze fixed on the little girl. Sophie's hair, dark like her father's, fanned across the pillow, her skin too pale, her lips tinged blue. "How is she?" "Critical," Ben whispered, his voice cracking. "It was a hard episode. Congenital defect worse than we thought. Her oxygen dropped so fast they had to intubate her before I could." He trailed off, his hand tightening around Sophie's. She kept asking for the song. "The one we were writing together. I promised I'd finish it, but I couldn't." Abby's heart clenched, a sharp ache that felt like her own. She knelt beside the bed, her hand hovering near Sophie's, not daring to touch. "You think she—" "Hear it?" Ben's eyes met hers, tears brimming but not falling. "I don't know, but I need her to." "Then we'll finish it now," Abby said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Love travels, Ben, through glass, wires, beeping machines, especially then." He looked at her, something shifting in his gaze, like a man seeing. Light after years in the dark. They sat side by side, no piano, no keys, just two hands tapping a soft rhythm on Sophie's blanket. Abby began to hum, a melody born from the fragment Ben had left on the music stand, its notes tentative but alive. Ben joined in, his voice rusty, hesitant but growing stronger, a harmony weaving around her like a lifeline. Asterisk, the sky is dark. But not for long. The stars still hum while you sleep, my light. Asterisk. The words were half-formed, a lullaby still being born, but they carried a weight that filled the room. Sophie's fingers twitched, just slightly, a faint press against Abby's palm. "She heard," Abby said, her voice breaking into a smile. Ben's eyes glistened. "She always does." The moment stretched, sacred, like a cathedral built from whispers, but it was fleeting. Hours later, a doctor entered, his expression measured but kind. "Her vitals are stabilizing," he said, glancing at his tablet. "The medication helped, but this isn't sustainable. She needs a heart transplant. There's a specialist team in Boston, but—" He hesitated, his eyes flickering to Ben. "You'll need to prepare. A few weeks, maybe less if another episode hits." Ben stood, his frame rigid. "How long do we have to get her there?" "Weeks," the doctor said. "But the costs, transplant, transport, aftercare, it's significant." Ben leaned against the wall, his voice barely audible. "I can't afford Boston. I can't even afford another revisit." Abby stepped forward, her voice firm. "Then let me help." Ben's head snapped up, pain flickering in every line of his face. "I can't ask you for that." "You didn't," she said, her eyes locked on his. "I'm offering." He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "Do you know what it feels like to have your dignity measured in invoices?" Abby reached out, her hand brushing his cheek, a gesture more intimate than she'd intended. "Do you know what it feels like to have money and still feel useless?" The words stopped him, a quiet detonation in the sterile room. She continued, her voice softer now, raw. "I've sat in boardrooms making million-dollar decisions while my soul begged for something real. Don't rob me of the chance to give something that matters. A beat passed, heavy with unspoken truths. Then Ben pulled her into a fierce, silent embrace. Not romantic, not restrained, just human. Two people holding each other at the edge of fear, the hospital's hum fading into the background. The next day, Abby didn't return to her office. She cleared her schedule, ignoring Emily's frantic texts about the board's demands and the ex. Posts now dissecting her disappearance from public view. Instead, she called every contact she had in pediatric cardiology, pulling strings she'd once reserved for corporate deals. She donated anonymously to the hospital's foundation, fast-tracking Sophie's transfer to Boston, but she didn't stop there. She sat beside Sophie's bed, telling stories of music halls she'd never seen, bringing coloring books with piano-shaped crayons, reading music notes like fairy tales. Slowly, room 312 began to smell less like antiseptic and more like hope. That evening, Abby visited Ben's apartment, a modest walk-up in Brooklyn that smelled faintly of cinnamon and warm drinks. She hadn't planned to come, but the silence of her penthouse had grown deafening, and the music fragment in her pocket felt like a map she needed to follow. Ben answered the door, his face etched with exhaustion but softened by surprise. "Abby," he said, stepping aside. "Didn't expect you." Inside, the apartment was small but warm, a lived-in contrast to the sterile grandeur of Harmony's headquarters. A worn couch sat beneath a wall of framed sheet music, yellowed at the edges. A second-hand bookshelf sagged with classical scores and children's books, their spines creased from love. At the center, under a window where moonlight fell like a golden curtain, stood an upright piano, modest but cared for, its keys warm but gleaming. Abby's eyes locked on it, her breath catching. "That's where it started," Ben said, following. A gaze, his voice quiet. Sophie took her first steps toward that bench. "I was practicing Brahms, I think." She let go of the coffee table and walked straight to the music. Abby smiled, tracing the piano's edge. "It smells like memories in here." Ben sat across from her, 2 mugs of tea steaming between them. "That's what grief is most days." Memory with sharp edges. Before Abby could respond, a small figure appeared in the doorway, clutching a thick folder with frayed edges. Sophie, released from the hospital that morning but still pale, beamed despite her fragility. "Miss Abby," she said, her voice bright but thin. "Look at Daddy's songs. Well, half of them. He says most are sleeping." Abby raised an eyebrow, taking the folder gently. "Sleeping?" Ben rubbed the back of his neck, a rare flush creeping up his face. "Unfinished ideas. Melodies I was too tired or too scared to chase down." Abby opened the folder, her fingers tracing a delicate, handwritten melody, its notes spiraling like whispers across the staff. It ended mid-phrase, abrupt, like a story cut short. "You wrote this," she said, her voice soft with awe. "It's beautiful, Ben, but it stops too soon." He shrugged, his eyes distant. So did a lot of things. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward but dense, like a note sustained beyond its measure. Sophie broke it, her voice soft but sure. "Daddy used to play at night when he thought I was asleep. I always listened." Abby turned to her, warmth flooding her chest. "Do you play too?" "I try," Sophie said, her small hands flexing proudly. "But my fingers are short." "They'll grow," Ben said, his voice gentle but firm. "And they already know more than most people's hearts." Later, after Sophie drifted to her room, humming a tune as she drew pictures of pianos with wings, Abby sat at the piano beside Ben. The score was still open, its unfinished melody a challenge. "Why this one?" she asked. "Why not finish it?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Because I wrote it for someone I never got to say goodbye to," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Finishing it felt like letting her go. Abby didn't ask who. She didn't need to. She placed her hand on the keys, tentative, careful. "Some songs aren't meant to be endings," she said slowly. "They're meant to be open doors." He looked at her, a spark flickering in his eyes. "You think I should finish it?" "No," she replied, her voice steady now. "I think we should." Their hands moved together, filling in the blank bars, testing variations, building layer upon layer of sound. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. At one point, Ben paused, listening. He modulated early. "I know," Abby said, smiling. It felt right. He shook his head, mock disapproval masking a warmth she hadn't seen before. "You're breaking the rules." "Rules never raised a child alone," she said softly. "Rules didn't hold you together when your world fell apart." Ben looked at her, his gaze unguarded for the first time. "No, but music did." The clock struck midnight before they noticed, the melody lingering like a promise. As Abby left, she turned at the door. "Thank you, Ben, for letting me in." He smiled faintly, the kind that carried more hope than he'd admit. "Good night, Miss Carter." And as the door closed, Abby realized she hadn't just found music. She'd found a reason to listen again. The boardroom of Harmony Records was a monument to control. Its 42-foot walnut table polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the faces of power and expectation. On August 15th, 2025, Abigail Carter sat at its head, her back straight, her hands interlaced, but not as the CEO who'd once commanded this space. Today, she wore navy, no jewelry, no makeup, a woman stripped of armor, ready for a reckoning. The air was thick with tension, the kind that hums before a storm breaks. Outside, New York's skyline glittered, indifferent to the battle within. Inside, the board members filed in, their expressions cold, tightened by whispers of scandal and the relentless churn of social media. The hashtag #COVJanitor hashtag had surged to 8 million views, with ex-posts now dissecting Abby's reckless behavior and Ben's opportunistic motives. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, and the board was here to bury it. Charles Carter, her uncle and chairman, entered last, his tailored suit a silent declaration of authority. He took his seat across from Abby, his eyes like flint. "The optics haven't improved, Abigail," he began, his voice clipped, a judge delivering a sentence. "Despite your silence, the story's grown legs. We need to address it." "I'm aware," Abby said, her tone calm but unyielding. She'd spent the night in her penthouse, not sleeping, but staring at the piano she hadn't touched in years, the handwritten music fragment from Ben tucked beside it. The board's demands felt distant compared to the hospital room where Sophie Sullivan lay, her small hand twitching to the rhythm of an unfinished lullaby. Charles nodded toward a legal packet on the table, its edges crisp, final. "We've drafted a mutual separation agreement. You step down quietly. We ensure your reputation stays intact. Your severance remains whole, and the press gets a clean version of your exit." Victoria Hayes, VP of Marketing, leaned forward, her voice sharp. "We can spin this as your choice. A pivot to personal growth, maybe philanthropy, music, outreach programs. The public will eat it up." Abby's eyes didn't waver. "You want me to lie?" Charles's jaw tightened. "We want to protect the company. And frankly, to protect you." Abby leaned forward, her voice cutting through the room like a clear note. "You want me to erase the truth because it makes you uncomfortable. Because I sat at a piano and felt something real with someone who doesn't wear a suit. Because I dared to be human in a place built for machines." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're not being asked to apologize for feelings. You're being asked to take responsibility for the risk you introduced. This company can't afford your indiscretions." "There's no risk in loving people," Abby said, her voice steady, resonant. The risk is pretending you don't. Silence. Fell, heavy, sacred. Charles closed the folder with a snap. If you reject this, we'll proceed with a vote of no confidence. You'll be removed with cause. That affects your severance, your legacy, everything. Abby exhaled slowly, her hands unclenching. She thought of Ben, his hands on Sophie's blanket, tapping out a melody to keep her alive. She thought of her father, his voice echoing across decades. Asterisk. Don't touch that piano until you're worth hearing. Asterisk. She thought of the music she'd played with Ben. Imperfect, but true. I've carried this company through lawsuits, market crashes, artist meltdowns, she said, her voice low, deliberate. I've worked 18-hour days, built brands that outsold expectations, mentored interns who became VPs. And now you want me gone because I love someone you didn't see coming. Charles flinched, almost imperceptibly. Victoria looked away. Abby stood, her presence filling the room. Let me ask you something, Charles. When did we become so afraid of grace? The room stilled, the question hanging like a cord, unresolved. Abby reached into her bag and placed a small envelope in front of Charles. What's this? He asked, his voice wary. A personal donation to the Harmony Foundation, she said, to fund music education for underprivileged kids. Name it after whoever you want, but don't let it go to waste. She turned to the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces she'd once fought to impress. I'm leaving, not because I'm ashamed, but because I've remembered who I am. No one moved as she walked out, her heels clicking softly, a rhythm of release. She didn't take her nameplate, didn't say goodbye. Some endings didn't need punctuation-only purpose. Outside, the city's gray sky pressed down, heavy with the threat of rain. Abby stood on the sidewalk, watching her reflection in Harmony's mirrored glass. The woman staring back wasn't the hungry, ambitious CEO who'd entered this tower a decade ago. That woman had been brilliant, lonely, chained to a title. This one was awake, unmoored, but free. Her phone buzzed fan letters, Emily had said, from people who'd seen the viral video and felt something real. Abby didn't open them. She didn't need validation. She needed air. That evening, she found Ben sitting on a park bench just past the hospital gardens, headphones around his neck, eyes fixed on the horizon. Sophie was stable, but still in Boston's queue, her heart transplant a looming necessity. Abby sat beside him, the silence between them comfortable, familiar. You're not wearing the armor today, Ben said, his voice low, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I left it in a boardroom downtown, she replied, her tone light but carrying the weight of her choice. He glanced at her, his gray-green eyes searching. What happened? I resigned. A long pause stretched between them, the park's breeze carrying the scent of damp earth. They'll regret it, Ben said finally. No, Abby said, her voice steady. But I won't. He looked at her fully now, his expression softening. You're different. I remembered something, she said, her eyes meeting his. The title next to your name means nothing if it costs you the music inside you. Ben turned away, his voice low when he spoke. I didn't want to be. The reason you lost everything. You weren't, she replied, her hand brushing his arm. You were the reason I found it. He went still, her words settling like a melody he hadn't expected. I watched you fight for Sophie, she continued. Heard you play music you hadn't touched in years. Saw you rebuild your soul note by note. And somewhere in that, I realized I wanted to play again too, not just piano, but life. A breeze passed, rustling the leaves above. Ben's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. She's going to Boston tomorrow. She's scared. So am I. So are we, Abby said, her hand finding his. But we do it anyway. That's what love does. He smiled, a true exhale, the first she'd seen unshadowed by grief. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded music fragment. "You left this on the piano." He took it, his fingers tracing the notes. "It's not finished." "Then let's finish it," she said, her voice steady, a promise. That night, Ben returned to his apartment alone, the quiet heavier than usual. Sophie was still in the hospital, her transfer to Boston scheduled for dawn. He sat at his upright piano, the moonlight slicing through the window, illuminating the worn keys. A folded piece of paper caught his eye, tucked beneath a stack of Sophie's drawings. It was in her shaky handwriting, addressed in block letters. Asterisk, to Daddy, from Sophie, but serious this time. Asterisk, his hands trembled as he opened it. Asterisk, Dear Daddy, if I don't wake up after Boston, don't be sad. I know I was your song, but you're mine too. Promise you'll play our song one day, not alone, but for people, like Mommy used to say, where love can echo. Tell Miss Abby thank you for finding your music. P.S. I put something under the piano. It's for when you're ready. Love, Sophie, the bravest girl you ever met. Asterisk. Ben's breath caught, tears blurring the words. He knelt beside the piano, his fingers prying at the warped wood panel beneath the keys. Inside, in a small jewelry box that once held his wife's ring, was a brass key and a sticky note. Use this when you feel like being loud again. A doodle of a piano and a smiley sun framed the word loud. He laughed through his tears, the sound breaking the silence. The key was to Lincoln Chapel, a small venue at the city's edge, a place where music once lived free of applause or critics. He held the key, the weight of Sophie's faith pressing against his chest. For years, he'd thought he'd given up music, but she'd seen the truth. He'd only been waiting for a reason to play again. And now, with Abby's courage echoing in his mind, he knew the stage wasn't lost. It was just waiting for him to return. The Lincoln Chapel stood at the edge of New York City Park, its weathered stone facade half hidden by blooming dogwood trees, their petals catching the golden light of an August evening in 2025. The chapel was no Carnegie Hall, but its small stage and creaking pews held a quiet sanctity, a haven for music students and lost souls before it closed years ago. Abigail Carter had reopened it, quietly funding its revival through a nonprofit under an alias, a secret she hadn't shared until now. Tonight, August 20th, 2025, the chapel's doors opened for a concert that wasn't advertised, wasn't ticketed, just whispered about. A ripple born from a viral video that had faded from X's trending lists but lingered in hearts. Inside. The air buzzed with anticipation, not from celebrities or critics, but from ordinary people, nurses who'd held Sophie Sullivan's hand during her worst nights, janitors who'd shared coffee with Ben, teachers, single moms, and tired fathers who'd seen the duet video and felt something stir. The grand piano stood at center stage, its surface gleaming despite the room's age, a beacon in the soft glow of candles lining the walls. Abby knelt beside Sophie in the front row, her eyes bright with a mix of pride and nerves. Sophie, fresh from her heart transplant in Boston, wore a scar peeking from her collar like a badge of courage, her smile steady despite her fragility. "You sure you remember the first part?" Abby asked, her voice gentle. Sophie beamed, her small hands flexing. "I practiced with Daddy every day." Abby laughed, covering her mouth. "And if you get nervous?" "I'll pretend you're a giant marshmallow," Sophie said, giggling. "Deal," Abby replied, her heart swelling. She glanced at the stage, where Ben adjusted the sheet music, though they wouldn't need it. His navy shirt was unbuttoned. At the collar, his posture calm but alive. No longer the shadow of a janitor but a man ready to be seen. Ben stepped to the microphone, the room falling silent. "Tonight isn't about perfect notes," he said, his voice steady, resonant. "It's not about talent or technique. It's about what happens when we stop running from the parts of ourselves that hurt and start letting them sing." He gestured. To the wing, Sophie. The room held its breath as Sophie walked to the stage, her small figure illuminated by the warm light. Ben lifted her onto the bench, her hands resting lightly on the keys. They began to play, the melody slow, gentle, like a seed breaking through soil. It was the lullaby they'd hummed in the hospital, the one Abby had joined beside Sophie's bed, now blooming into something whole. Sophie's fingers, still weak, carried the first part with a precision that belied her age, each note a heartbeat. When her strength faltered, she looked at Ben and whispered, "Your turn." Ben took over, his hands dancing across the keys, not as a performance, but as a prayer. The music wasn't polished, but it was pure, carrying the weight of hospital nights. The mop and bucket, Sophie's first word, his wife's final breath, and Abby's courage to walk away from an empire. Midway through, a string quartet rose. In the back, their bows weaving a soft harmony. A children's choir stood, their voices lifting like dawn breaking. The room wasn't just watching a concert, it was inside it, a collective exhale of forgiveness, hope, and hearts mended. Abby sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on Ben and Sophie, not crying but listening, her hands clasped tightly. The music held every moment they'd shared. The lobby duet, the hospital vigil, the night she'd left harmony behind. When the final note faded, the room didn't applaud. It stood still, as if afraid to disturb the holiness of the silence. Then, one by one, people placed candles at the stage's base, their flames flickering like echoes of Sophie's new heart. Later, Abby joined Ben on the empty stage, the chapel quiet now, the audience lingering outside. "Do you think she heard it?" Ben asked, his voice soft. His eyes on the candles. Abby took his hand, her touch warm, certain. "I think she was the one playing it through you." He nodded, a tear drying at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't think I had anything left." "You were never empty," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Just waiting." In the weeks that followed, Ben and Abby launched the Sophie Sullivan Foundation, its mission to bring music therapy to underfunded hospitals, schools, and community centers across the U.S. The idea had sparked in Boston, where Sophie's recovery inspired nurses to hum the lullaby in pediatric wards. Abby didn't return to boardrooms. She joined the foundation as a co-founder, a pianist, a woman who'd remembered what power sounded like, not control, but connection. They didn't chase fame or applause, only small concerts in quiet rooms. Sunday pancakes with Sophie, letters from children who felt heard for the first time. Every night, Sophie would say, "Play me the song, Daddy, the one that found me." And Ben would softly, lovingly, until she fell asleep, her new heart beating steady, a melody worth growing into. This story is a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and music to heal wounds that words cannot touch. Abby, Ben, and Sophie remind us that our deepest strengths lie not in titles or achievements, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to choose connection over control, and to find meaning in the echoes we leave behind. In a world driven by optics and algorithms, their journey challenges us to listen to the quiet songs within us, those of loss, hope, and resilience. It reflects the real struggles of 2025 America, the weight of social media judgment, the cost of healthcare, the divide between classes. Yet it offers a universal truth. Love and art can bridge any gap. Turning silence into symphony. We invite you to join Legacy Stories on YouTube, where we share tales of healing, courage, and humanity. Subscribe to be part of our community. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your presence matters. Stay kind, stay brave, and remember, the loudest songs are often played by the quietest hearts.